What Bannon wanted, what the Trump administration wants, is to keep everything moving fast.
Muzzle velocity.
If you're always consumed by the next outrage, you can't look closely at the last one. Then the impression of Trump's power remains, and the fact that he keeps stepping on rakes is missed. The projection of strength obscures the reality of weakness. Don't believe him.
Okay, I've heard really good things about this video from Ezra Klein. So let's watch it together, you and me.
If you want to understand the first few weeks of the second Trump administration, go back and listen to what Steve Bannon told PBS's Frontline in 2019.
The opposition party is the media. And the media can only, because they're dumb and they're lazy, they can only focus on one thing at a time. All we have to do is flood the zone. Every day we hit them with 3 things. They'll bite on one and we'll get all of our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang. These guys will never be able to recover, but we gotta start with muzzle velocity. So it's gotta start, it's gotta hammer, it's gotta, muzzle velocity.
Muzzle velocity. Bannon's insight there is real. Focus is a fundamental substance of democracy. It is particularly the substance of opposition. People largely learn of what the government is doing through the media. So if you overwhelm the media...
A record-setting number of executive orders.
Everybody pardons. Violence, non-violence.
Including assaulting police officers.
Birthright citizenship.
We live in unprecedented times right now.
If you keep it moving from one thing to the next...
So far, so good.
Is this legal?
If you give it too many places it needs to look.
You've never been deported before?
All at once.
All federal grants and loans will be halted.
Look, there is a purge happening.
Frankly, unprecedented in its nature.
Guantanamo.
DEI.
It's been really obvious that this current administration has explicitly pursued the kind of strategy that Bannon laid out, just flooding the end zone with shit. He said this 8 years ago. Bannon said this 8 years ago about the first Trump administration. And it seems like they're doing that on crack this time around. Like this time around, the volume of things, the sheer volume of things, the frequency of things happening, and the egregious nature of those things is really like 3x what we saw in 2017 when he was first inaugurated.
The Gulf of America.
No coherent opposition can really emerge. It is hard to even think coherently. Donald Trump's first 2 weeks in the White House have followed Bannon's strategy like a script. The flood is a point. The overwhelm is a point. The message wasn't in any one executive order or announcement. It was in the cumulative effect of...
That's why I've been trying to tell people to like brace themselves or rather pace themselves. My fiance too, I've been telling her like, pace yourself. Like it's gonna be a long 4 years. If we take the bait on every little thing he does, we're gonna be burnt out by next week. And that really stifles opposition. And so this time around, like this Trump presidency, I've been really intentional about how much I allow this stuff to bother me. It's not like the stuff is not worth being upset over. It's just, I think we really have to make a conscious decision to do triage and conserve our energy. If we don't, it will run out. Like we will get burnt out and we'll succumb to doomerism. And I hate doomers as much as I hate hippies. No disrespect, DG hippie. I hate doomers. I hate people. Doomers wake up in the morning and they're miserable and they have zero hope for the future and they spend their days trying to make other people feel as hopeless and pessimistic as they do. I hate them. But I understand the draw of doomerism. I understand why people get kind of drawn into that hopelessness. It's a very human reaction to the sort of things that are happening right now, which is why it's especially important to conserve your energy and pick your battles wisely. So I heavily with his kind of messaging right now here.
Of all of them. The sense that this is Trump's country now. It is his government now. It follows his will. It does what he wants. That he is limitless. If he says that birthright citizenship is over, then it's over. Or so he wants you to think. In Trump's first term, people said, don't normalize him. In a second, though, the task, I think, is a little bit clearer. Don't believe him. Because Trump knows the power of marketing, the power of belief. If you make people believe something is true, you make it likelier that it becomes true. He clawed his way back to great wealth by playing a fearsome billionaire on TV. He remade himself as a winner after the 2020 election by refusing to admit he had ever lost. The American presidency is a limited office, but Trump has never wanted to be president. What he's always wanted to be is king. And his plan this time is to first play king on TV. If we believe he is already king, if we believe he already has all that power, we will be likelier to let him govern as a king. We will then give him that power. Don't believe him. Trump has real powers, but they are the powers of the presidency, the powers Joe Biden had, the powers Barack Obama had. The pardon power is vast and unrestricted, and so he could indeed pardon the January 6th rioters. Federal security protection is under the discretion of the executive branch. And so yes, Trump could remove protection from Anthony Fauci and Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and Mark Milley and even Brian Hook, this largely unknown former State Department official who's under threat from Iran, who even donated time to Trump's transition team.
I would be very happy to put President Trump's record in the Middle East against any other president.
All of this, it was an act of astonishing cruelty and callousness. This from a man who nearly died by an assassin's bullet months ago. As much as anything ever has been, this, to me, this was an X-ray of the smallness of Trump's soul. But it was an act that was within his official power. But the president cannot rewrite the Constitution. Within days, his birthright citizenship order was frozen by a judge, by a Reagan appointee, who told Trump's lawyers.
It was something like what I think he said it was something like one of the most blatantly unconstitutional acts he's ever seen or something like that.
I have difficulty understanding how a member of the bar would state unequivocally that this is a constitutional order. It just boggles my mind. Then, a judge froze Trump's spending freeze. He froze it even before it went into full effect. And shortly thereafter, the Trump administration rescinded the entire order, in part to avoid a court case that it seemed pretty clear they would lose. What Bannon wanted, what the Trump administration wants, is to keep everything moving fast.
Muzzle velocity.
If you're always consumed by the next outrage, you can't look closely at the last one. Then the impression of Trump's power remains, and the fact that he keeps stepping on rakes is missed. The projection of strength obscures the reality of weakness. Don't believe him. You can see this a few ways. Is Trump playing a part? Is he making a bet, or is he triggering a crisis? Those, I think, are the options, and I'm not certain that even he knows the answer. Trump has always been an improviser. But if you take it as a bet, a calculation, then here is a bet he's making. Maybe this Supreme Court, stocked with his appointees, gives him powers no peacetime president has ever possessed. Perhaps all this becomes legal now that he has asserted its legality. It's not impossible to imagine that bet paying off for him. So what if the bet fails? What if Trump's arrogations of power are soundly rejected by the courts? Then comes a question of constitutional crisis. Does he just ignore the court's ruling? To do that would be to attempt a kind of coup. I wonder if they have the stomach for that. The withdrawal of the OMB order, to me, suggests they don't, because bravado aside, Trump's political capital is thin. Gallup has Trump's approval rating at 47%. That is about 10 points beneath Joe Biden in January of 2021. Both in his first and his second terms, he entered office with approval ratings.
His approval rating is dropping somewhat fast. In the averages, he's dropped, I think, 5 points in his first month of being, less than a month of being, in his first 2 weeks, 3 weeks really, of being president. That's a pretty precipitous decline. Yeah, because polls have been so reliable. To be fair, the polls in 2024 were pretty, close to the money. Polls in 2024 were better than 2016 and 2020. They were well within the margin of error. Quite frankly, he's doing things that, a lot of people find unpopular. The executive order that he signed yesterday with respect to trans boys and girls sports is very popular, but I just don't know how important that executive order is. Like, beyond a couple headlines for like a day or two, this is something that does not impact 99.99999999999% of people that live in this country. It's just not an issue that impacts their lives directly at all, or indirectly. Like, how many of you are aware of a trans boy competing in girls sports? I'm serious. Do any of you know a single example of this happening in your life or your family's life or your coworkers' lives or anyone? It would really shock me if anybody in here is familiar with an actual example of this in their lives. It's just such a non-issue. And so they're touting this as like, oh, this is a big victory and this is a really popular move, but nobody's going to be affected by this. The pardoning of January 6 people was unpopular. I suspect that his moves at the FBI are going to be unpopular. His appointing of Elon Musk to do Doge stuff is unpopular. And so, he's really rapidly wasting his political capital when he needs it the most. The presidents in this country, it's just an American pastime. What we like to do is we like to give one political party power for 2 years is what we like to do. If you're not from America, I don't know how you guys do it in Europe, or I don't know where you're from, the Philippines or Canada, Brazil, Norway, wherever you guys are from. But in America, what we like to do is we like to give one political party a big enough mandate to actually pass legislation. We like to give them 2 years. And then after 2 years, we have what are called midterm elections, where people vote on representatives that serve 2-year terms, and people sometimes will be voting on senators, which serve 6-year terms. And what usually happens is we take power away from the party that's in charge. So Joe Biden was elected in 2020, very slim margins in Congress, but we gave him majorities in the Senate. It was 50-50, but with the tie-breaking vote from Kamala, that's a majority in the Senate. And we gave him a majority in the House. We lost a few seats, actually, in the House in 2020. And so our majority was not that big. It was like a 8-seat majority. It was really not that big. Not a lot of room for error. And Biden was aware of this. Biden is a smart guy. And so he was aware of history and historical precedent. And, he did everything he could to just blitz as many pieces of legislation across the finish line that he could. And he did a remarkably good job doing so. They passed 7, 8, 9 bills that were pretty impactful bills, especially ARP and the infrastructure bill and the IRA. I mean, these were really big deals. And so Trump, similarly, he probably only has 2 years. I can't tell you for sure that this is going to happen, but probably it's the case that in 2026, the Democrats are going to take back the House. That's just what history teaches us is going to happen. It's what the first Trump taught us is what's going to happen. Trump just can't not be Trump. I mean, he's just, he's always going to be Trump. And so maybe I'm wrong. I don't want to give you a firm prediction at this point that, he doesn't keep control of the House and the Senate in the midterms. That's certainly the Senate is going to be really difficult to take back if we wanted to take that back in 2026. Not impossible, but it's going to be really tough. But the House is probably going to go to the Democrats. And, what is Trump spending that time doing? Well, not really too much. He's doesn't really seem to be focused on the cost of groceries right now. Doesn't really seem to be focused on the things that got him elected. He ran on lowering grocery prices. And then as soon as he gets inaugurated, he's telling people, well, I don't know, those prices, they're very sticky. It's very hard to adjust those prices. He's doing the mass deportation thing, but I suspect that will end up blowing up in his face. I don't know if it's going to take too long, but eventually you're going to start seeing cell phone captured footage of families being ripped apart and people crying and and I do think that eventually this is gonna start to turn for him. But yeah, what he seems to be blitzing in the first 2 weeks here is just he's just blowing all of the political capital that he has on culture war stuff, and that is not going to be stuff that really at the end of the day motivates people as much as things like the cost of groceries in 2 years when they go back to the ballot box to vote.
The withdrawal of the OMB order to me suggests they don't, because bravado aside, Trump's political capital is thin. Gallup has Trump's approval rating at 47%. That is about 10 points beneath Joe Biden in January of 2021. Both in his first and his second terms, he entered office with approval ratings below that of any other president in the modern era. And so I thought these defenses of Trump's firings were telling.
It is the belief of this White House and the White House counsel's office that the president was within his executive authority to do that.
The law says he's supposed to give 30 days notice. He didn't do that. Do you think he violated the law?
Well, technically, yeah.
Do you believe that it's legal?
By definition, it's his administration. They work for him at the pleasure of the president. And if it's illegal, it should be legal.
So then ask yourself, why isn't Trump trying to make it legal? There is a reason Trump is doing all this through executive orders rather than submitting these same directives as legislation to pass through Congress. A more powerful executive could convince Congress to eliminate the spending he opposes, or to reform the civil service to give him the powers of hiring and firing that he seeks. And there's a good reason to do that. To write these changes into legislation would make them both more durable and would allow him to argue their merits in a more strategic way. He would be reforming the entire system. But Republicans at the moment, they have only a 3-seat edge in the House. Smallest majority since the Great Depression.
Not great.
They have a 53-seat majority in the Senate. Trump is obviously doing nothing to reach out to Democrats. If Trump tried to pass this agenda as legislation, it would fail. And that would make Trump look weak. And Trump doesn't want to look weak. He remembers John McCain humiliating him in his first term by casting the deciding vote against Obamacare repeal. Congress is a place where you can lose.
McConnell, that to me was the second most striking. I remember this moment so vividly, you guys. This was pretty early on in Trump's presidency. I want to say it was about 1 or 2 months in. The House did pass their own repeal of and replacement of Obamacare, of the ACA. And Donald Trump, to take a trip down memory lane, took a victory lap in the Rose Garden of the White House with House Republicans. So again, if you're not from America, to pass a bill in the United States, you need to pass it through the House of the House of Representatives, with just a simple majority is fine to pass it there. In the Senate, you need a filibuster-proof majority in most cases, which means you need to get to 60 votes. I do believe that they tried to pass this through reconciliation, so I think they only needed 50 votes for this. And it was a big deal. The ACA completely overhauled the way that healthcare is done in this country. You know, did it go far enough? No, but it did overhaul quite a bit. It afforded protections for pre-existing conditions. It allowed people to stay on their insurance until the age of 25 or 26 instead of 21, whatever it was at before. It expanded Medicare massively. It expanded Medicaid massively for states that accepted those Medicaid expansions. It was a really, in Joe Biden's words, it was a really big deal. And the very first thing that Trump tried to do in his first term was get rid of the ACA. What they wanted to do was get rid of the ACA, cut down on government spending, and then that way they could more easily justify what they really wanted to do, which was the tax cuts. They ended up just doing the tax cuts anyways, exploded our debt and deficit, and yes, that's what Donald Trump spent legislatively all of his political capital on in the first 2 years of his first term. And this moment was such a huge moment because it was a protracted fight in the Senate. Donald Trump had done this victory lap with House Republicans. They did this press conference. They're all laughing, giving each other high fives. But the reporting suggests that behind the scenes, Republicans were trying to tell Trump, like, wait, hold on, don't do a victory lap. Like, we don't know if we can get this passed in the Senate, and this might make us look stupid. But Trump was just at the time just like, no, let's do it. It's going to be great. And then it goes to the Senate, and there were big question marks around John McCain, who for years had ragged against the ACA, for years had voted for repealing the ACA in symbolic votes during Obama's lame duck presidency, when there was no legislation that could get done. They do a lot of like symbolic votes. They'll put votes to a floor, or they'll put things to a floor vote that they know will fail just to get like headlines. And Pence was on the Senate floor that night, aggressively trying to negotiate with John McCain, or trying to convince him to sign on to this medication. And there was so much drama, and this went on until like midnight or 1 a.m. my time. And so I stayed up until this happened. And I remember watching this moment live, and you can hear gasps in the Senate, on the Senate floor. I gasped too watching it. It was like such intense drama. For someone who is like really engaged with politics, this was kind of like a Super Bowl moment. It was like, you know.
Remembers John McCain humiliating him in his first term by casting
you can hear the gasps
vote against Obamacare repeal. Congress is a place.
All the gasps, you know, like that was such a high drama moment
where you can lose.
Yeah, and that was the very first lesson that Trump was taught when it came to Congress's ability to check him, was like, wait, I can't just do everything I want to do. He was humiliated. It was humiliating for him, and he never forgave John McCain. He was so petty about this that when John McCain died, like he did not have it in him to be respectful of John McCain and his legacy when McCain died. Because of this moment, he just never forgave him for that.
That is a tension at the heart of Trump's whole strategy.
Today, I will sign a series of historic executive orders.
Trump is acting like a king because he's too weak to govern like a president.
With these actions, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense.
This flurry of activity, it's meant to suggest the existence of a plan. But the closer you look, even at this first 2 weeks, the less true it seems. They are scrambling and flailing already. They are leaking against each other in the press already. We learned that the OMB directive was drafted reportedly without the input or oversight of key Trump officials. It didn't go through the proper approval process, an administration official told the Washington Post. For that to be the process and product of such a sweeping signature initiative in the second week of a president's second term, it's embarrassing. But it's not just a spending freeze. The Trump administration is waging an immediate war on the bureaucracy, trying to replace the deep state they believe hampered them in the first term. And a big part of this project seems to have been outsourced to Elon Musk, who's bringing the tactics he used at Twitter to the federal government.
We're about 20% of the original size.
So 80% left?
Yes.
He has longtime aides now at the Office of Personnel Management, and the email that got sent out to nearly all federal employees even reused the subject line of the email he sent out to Twitter employees after the acquisition. A fork in the road. It's a kind of bragging. Elon wants he wants everybody to know it was him. The email offered millions of civil servants a backdoor buyout. Agree to resign, and in theory, at least, you can collect your paycheck and benefits until the end of September without doing any work. The Washington Post reported that the email blindsided many in the Trump administration who would normally have consulted on a notice like that. It blindsided many of the people who are going to have to run these agencies that are now going to be dotted by resignations. I suspect Musk thinks of the federal workforce as this huge mass of woke and largely useless ideologues. For most federal workers, they have very little to do with politics. About 16%.
Understand that the origin story for Elon Musk's right-wing turn was kind of unbelievable. He was like a darling child of the Democratic Party for a really long time, voted Democratic, donated to Democrats. And then his trans daughter went to college. I'm not making this up. This is the genesis of his right-wing turn. His trans daughter went to college, came out as trans, and started expressing openness, curiosity, praise for leftist ideology. He learned about Karl Marx in college and kind of started to become a communist. And that is where this started. It all just kind of like snowballed after that. And then until it reached a fever pitch really in like 2021, 2022 or whatever. It all started when he broke up with Amber Heard. The way that he talks about his trans daughter going to college it's really kind of sad. Like he says the woke mind virus killed his son. She ended up filing in court. She petitioned for an order of emancipation. Like she didn't want anything to do with him and his money or nothing. She wanted a complete separation between him and her, and had some really choice words to use to describe him and his parenting in subsequent like social media posts. She was pretty private, and then she started posting about her dad. A really wild story. Yeah.
None of them work in healthcare. These are nurses and doctors who work for the veterans.
This was after COVID. Like, he didn't really, I think it's easy to sort of like misremember, oh, Elon was always this way. He really didn't like lose his mind until after COVID. Like, COVID broke a lot of brains. COVID broke a lot of brains. You know, Rogan was already like not on a great path before COVID, but it fully sent him over the edge. And with Elon, it was like post-COVID stuff. Like the first time Elon made me furl my brow a little bit was when he said, I predict that, you know, COVID is going to be down to 0 cases by Easter. He was on Twitter talking about how the cases were going to go down to 0. And this was at a time when all of the leading like world scientists and epidemiologists were saying this is going to be an issue. Like this is a problem now. This is a pandemic until it's not. And it's going to get bad. That's what everyone, every specialist, is that a word? Specialist? Everybody that was an authority on these things was warning everyone, you know, like a lot of people are going to die. And this is the worst pandemic that we're going to see since the Spanish flu. And he was on Twitter saying like, oh yeah, the cases are going to be down to 0 by Easter. And I was like, wait, what? Like, why is he saying that? That was like the first kind of hint, like what's going on here? And then it was from that point, it was kind of like a rapid decline. So it was like a combination of his trans daughter coming out as trans and then COVID. Just boy, oh boy, he was never the same after that.
Affairs Department. How many of them does Musk?
I said specialists. Jesus Christ. Sometimes my brain don't work so good.
Want to lose? How many primary care doctors treating veterans is he hoping take a buyout? Twitter worked terribly after Musk's takeover. It had these frequent outages and bugs, but its outages are not a national scandal. When VA healthcare degrades, it is a national scandal.
Most of what we're talking about here is a group text service at scale. Like, how many people are really needed for that, you know?
What Trump wants you to see in all this activity is command. What is really in all this activity is chaos. They have convinced themselves that speed and force is a strategy unto itself, that it is in a sense a replacement for an actual strategy for thinking and talking.
That's the other thing too. It's like, okay, yeah, you bring up a good point where it's like, it's COVID, his daughter coming out as trans, and a crippling social media addiction.
Things through for consultation, for planning things out. Don't believe them. I had a conversation a couple months ago with someone who knows how the federal government works about as well as anyone alive. And I asked him what would worry him most if he saw Trump doing it. And what he said was he would worry most if Trump went slowly. If he began his term by doing things that made him more popular, that made his opposition weaker and more confused. If he worked by stealth, if he tried to build strength for the midterms while slowly expanding his powers and chipping away at the state in the places where it was weakest, where people couldn't really see him doing it. But
I think this is a really good point. Because I do think that there's a universe where Trump could be more calculated and galvanize, shore up more support for himself. Like he could do this in a way that would be quite clever and tremendously benefit him and his political movement. He's just like blitzing. All he knows how to, he does not do subtlety. He is not a calculated guy. I mean, maybe 1 or 2 moves, you know, if we're using like chess terms, maybe he's thinking 1 or 2 moves ahead. He's not thinking like 5 or 6 moves ahead. He's very much focused on like today's headlines. And he's just a very like emotionally reactive person.
Trump didn't do any of that. Instead,
muzzle velocity.
And so the opposition to Trump, which seems so listless and absent after the election, now it's beginning to rouse itself. There's a subreddit for federal employees where one of the top posts reads, "This non-buyout really seems to have backfired." I'll be honest, before that email went out, I was looking for anyone.
I think Ezra grossly underestimates what's going on here. He assumes it's Trump who's trying to consolidate power, but wouldn't it be the opposite? Wouldn't it be the people behind him? The MAGA movement is trying to capitalize on the chaos. Well, their fortunes are tied to Trump's, and Trump can, you know, to the extent that they can successfully use Trump as a vehicle to pursue their own agendas, is limited by Trump himself, because Trump's going to get in his own way.
Way to get out of this fresh hell. But now I'm fired up to make these goons as frustrated as possible. As I write this, it's been upvoted more than 39,000 times, and civil servant after civil servant is echoing the initial sentiment. In Iowa this week, Democrats flipped a state Senate seat in a district that Trump had won easily in 2024. The attempted spending freeze gave Democrats their voice back as they zeroed in on the popular programs Trump had imperiled. Trump isn't building support here, he's losing it. Trump isn't fracturing his opposition, he's finally uniting it. This is the weakness of the strategy that Bannon proposed and that Trump is following. It is a strategy that forces you into overreach. To keep the zone flooded, you have to keep acting. You have to keep moving. You have to keep creating new cycles of outrage or fear to keep the media and the opposition overwhelmed. But then you overwhelm yourself. They are flooding their own zone. I don't know that Trump sees his own fork in the road coming. He may believe he's a power he is claiming. That would be a mistake on his part. It would be a self-deception that could doom his presidency. But the real threat is if he convinces the rest of us to believe he has power he does not have. The first 2 weeks of his presidency have not shown his strength. He is trying to overwhelm you. He is trying to keep you off balance. He is trying to convince you of something that isn't true. Don't believe him.
I think I think he's completely just spot on, right on the money here. Just nailed it, like nailed this moment. And I think what he just spoke to should inform the Democrats for how they react in real time to Trump.